Hi, I'm Stella, and today we will be talking about managing temporal variation in visitor attractions. Scotland's tourism industry and its visitor attractions are the context of many of the findings and analyses in this chapter, including a case study highlighting the challenges of temporal visitor management in Scotland's nature-based and wilderness attractions operators. A broad view of what constitutes an attraction is adopted in this chapter. The importance of visitor attractions to many local, regional, and even national tourism economies has been well documented. In many parts of urban and rural Scotland, they are critical and represent a cornerstone of destination pool. Indeed, their ability to stimulate market development and overall visitor spend, to interpret and present aspects of cultural heritage and create local honeypots has been recognized by public agencies such as Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and most recently the Scottish Executive. Many attractions include all-weather facilities and as such have a potential to generate market demand throughout the year. Despite this, temporal variation through imbalances in demand and supply remains endemic in the visitor attraction sector. This is particularly the case in the cold temperate climatic zones within which a significant part of the world's tourism activities takes place. Visitor attractions display complex relationships with the temporal nature of tourism in their destination area. On the other hand, they are typically at the mercy of seasonal and periodic nature of market forces, which can manifest in either predictable or sometimes chaotic demand patterns during the course of an operating day, week, month, or year. Yet, through their operational policies, attractions can collectively and sometimes individually contribute to reinforce or combat patterns of demand disparity in a tourism destination, especially where major attractions or groups of attractions play a key role in promoting and sustaining the destination of which they are part. There is a growing range of options available to attractions as to how they respond to temporal challenges. However, before exploring such relationships and options, it is pertinent to consider what is meant by temporal variation. Towards an understanding of temporal variation in tourism. Historically, the term seasonality has been used as shorthand to convey the peak and through of temporal imbalances in tourism, particularly from a visitor demand perspective. Yet, the operational challenges faced by the visitor attraction points to a much more complex temporal canvas than dealing with the simply seasonal variation. In a contrast to most forms of commercial overnight guest accommodations, the inventory and space of commercially operated permanent attractions is temporarily perishable throughout the operating day, as well as from day to day and across the time spectrum of weeks, months, and seasons. Moreover, for many attraction operators, demand disparity between quiet and peak visitations period can generate external, community or destination costs, as well as internal costs arising from variable service operation. Concentrated demand patterns in trading periods, irrespective of the time scale, do not provide economic advantages for a fixed facility attraction with high fixed costs. For the purpose of this study, temporal variation is deconstructed into seasonality and short-term periodic variation. Seasonality in a tourism context is usually understood to refer to market-derived temporal imbalances. The term shoulder period is used extensively in tourism to denote a period of time linking peak demand and periods of least demand. Although there is often little evidence of criteria used to denote the characteristics of the shoulder period, similar vagueness applies to the term of off-peak, high season, mid-season, and low season. This is especially pertinent given the market peculiarities of individual attractions. When public agency intervention or destination-wide collaborative initiatives are used to promote seasonal extensions policies, low season market growth, seasonal employment, and so on. The twin peaks, multi-peaking, or non-peak characteristics of demand may even render concepts of a defined shoulder or low season obsolete in some locations. Seasonality is thus generally accepted to be a demand driven phenomenon, in which the vagaries of the market dictate opening and closing patterns of businesses and facilities and the levels of service provided at certain times of the year. However, our reliance on knowledge and understanding of demand patterns and characteristics to explain seasonality is an oversimplification. In addition to demand land market forces, factors that collectively influence the seasonal nature of tourism to a location and its attraction includes the following. First, the role of underlying casual factors such as institutional holidays, climate, social conventions, and evolving patterns of work life balance. Second, the supply side factors such as local labor availability, planning constraints, transport access, and corporate decisions on opening and closing. And lastly, the third one, wider community and resource implications such as the role of local stakeholders in determining facility use across the year, and the environment constraints and policy, for example, seasonal closure, such as conservation, preservation, community recovery, or spreading demand and facility use across the year. For example, is the local economic sustainability. Periodic variation therefore contributes to an understanding of temporal cycles in tourism that may be seen as distinct from longer term patterns of seasonality. Temporal downtime may represent a more meaningful descriptor in operational and economic terms.
Hi, I'm Giselle. Today we will talk about operational implication of seasonality for visitor attractions. The dynamic of an attraction's composite visitor market and the temporal characteristics of each market segment clearly influence the overall spread of revenues and visitor numbers. While this seems to state the obvious, many attractions continue to over-dependent on highly seasonal or temporarily fixed market sectors, such as families with school-aged children. In Scotland, there is a marked temporal difference between overseas and domestic holidays visit. As illustrated in Table 12.1, around 70% of visits to attractions occur during the second and third quarters of the year, which are influenced significantly by the summer-oriented overseas visitor holiday market. Operating to seasonally defined periods has long been a characteristic of Scottish attractions. The Visitor Attractions Monitor, or the VAM, represents the closest measure to a national census of visitor attractions within Scotland. The 2004 VAM identifies 251 Scottish attractions as operating for less than 9 months of the year from a survey total of 642, almost 40% of the total. The most prevalent and overrepresented in terms of seasonal attractions are those operated as charities or trusts and privately owned and managed attractions. It should be stressed that charities and trusts, as listed within the VAM, cover a spectrum of organizational types and legal arrangement, ranging from local community-run heritage centers, especially on island communities, to large estates such as some of the Borders and Perthshire historic houses. As with privately run businesses, seasonal operation may reflect specific motivational or influencing forces within the context of community, social, and environmental objectives as well as revenue-generating considerations. Scotland's two largest attractions estates, Historic Scotland and the National Trust for Scotland, have relatively few managed attractions in their respective portfolios that operate seasonally or unrestricted opening hours, reflecting their partnership in Scotland's national tourism seasonal extension campaigns. Irrespective of the forms, causes, or manifestations of temporal variations, there are some fundamentally universal implications for attractions operators. Two of the main ones are labor-related and capacity utilization issues. Labor force issues. A seasonally defined tourism destination can create instabilities in the local labor market, especially in tourism-dependent rural or peripheral locations. In their analysis of tourism in peripheral regions of Northern Europe and Maritime Canada, Baum and Hygiene noted the negative impact on the quality of service delivery caused by the short tourism season, which in turn reduced the competitive edge of amenities and visitor attractions in those places. A number of contributory issues were identified. First, recruitment of staff. The disproportionate cost to the organization of hiring staff for relatively short periods inhibits the development of progressive remunerations packages for those employees. An additional recruitment issue for some heritage attractions is that highlighted by Derry and Jago in 2001, they note the specialist craft skills required by some attractions operators to authenticate the visitor experience. Cost of training and development. Given that this is spread over a shorter time span, attractions may be less willing to invest in training and development for their seasonal staff, particularly where the work pattern is predominantly part-time. The Association of Scottish Visitor Attractions, or the ASVA, encourages its members to demonstrate commitment to raising services quality through extending training opportunities to all staff, both seasonal and permanent. Commitment of seasonal workers to the operation. Although it is accepted that an element of the labor force will prefer short-term contracts of the either full or part-time nature, for other job starters, there remain an issue of commitment to the organization. Faced with competition from other service sectors, offering the prospect of more permanent employment, seasonal attractions may have to carry the cost associated with relatively high staff turnover rates. Heritage attractions and those operated by trust often rely to a significant degree on volunteer staff. Table 12.2 shows the degree of prevalence of seasonal and volunteer staff in Scotland's visitor attractions, 20% and 40% respectively in 2004, from a sample of 549 operations. Jago and Derry, 2001, note the increasingly complexity of volunteers' motivation in heritage attractions and the ascendancy of personal development as a desired and remunerated reward. Accordingly, seasonal attractions relying on such staff may increasingly find themselves having to address issues around volunteer management and development to ensure their commitment to return the following season. Next is loss of skills and experience at the end of the season. Interlinked with commitment is the problem of consistency, where valid skill staffs are unavailable for the following season. Given that the essence of visitor attraction service delivery is often the interactions between the staff and the customers, consistency in service quality from year to year may depend on continuity of the skills, experience, and personal qualities of frontline staff. Second, capacity utilization. Although problems associated with temporal imbalances are most often considered in terms of underutilization, demand peaking can be just as problematic for visitor attractions. Symptoms of peak overutilizations include congestions, diminished visitor satisfactions from the experience, a heightened level of wear and tear on the core resource and its ancillary infrastructures, and externalities or community cost. Visitor attractions can employ a range of supply rationing methods to overcome capacity constraints during periods of peak demand. Most typically, these include queue management, cordoning car parking, limiting access when carrying capacity is reached. Increasingly popular large attractions are following the example of Madame Tussauds in introducing time ticketing as a way to smooth demand peaks. Recent additions include the London Eye and the Queen's Gallery of Buckingham Palace. Characteristics of temporal underutilizations include: first, perishability of unit of production. The element of permanency in the physical structure of attraction means that most attractions are relatively inflexible in adapting to lower scales of operation during quiet periods. Closure of rooms within historic houses or parts of museums. Underachievement of revenue earning potential during much of the operating season. Second, temporal demand or closure patterns in core attractions render ancillary revenue generating components perishable. Third, cash flow. Revenue and profit contributions are concentrated into a short operating periods and subsidize fixed and variable costs over the full operating periods. Finding from previous large-scale studies into Scotland, visitor attractions indicated that these financial considerations are the key reasons for attractions operating seasonal closures or restricted opening patterns during parts of the year. Opportunity cost of idle space, equipment, and staff for much of the operating periods, where the attraction is operating below its fixed capacity to produce. Fourth, capital investment. The income concentrating effect of temporal variation can determine the capital investment in tourism infrastructures and at destinations generally. For private sector attractions operators, the shorter the season, the greater are the risks in recouping investment costs and the longer the payback time required. In the increasingly competitive and uncertain national and international marketplace for leisure and tourism, overcoming the issues outlined above requires more resourceful and imaginative measures. Some of the main management responses to the temporal variations are discussed in the next section.
Hi, I'm Fatima. We will talk about management responses to temporal variation. In the first instances, it should be considered that there is no universal acceptance of the need or case for solving or overcoming temporal imbalances, especially where natural resources form the basis of managed attractions. Season and Wall is among the first to advocate the cause for dormant periods being necessary for the recovery of social and ecologically fragile environment, many of which may be the heritage-based resources. Temporal operation may be necessitated where a nature-based attraction is built around a natural cycle such as bird life migration. This is the basis of seasonal closure in the Lock-Carted Osprey Center in Speyside and Royal Society for the Protection of Birds or RSPB for Sinard Reserve in Sutherland. In the study of operator on the Danish island of Bornholm, Getz and Nilsson observed three types of operator response to dealing with extended period of low demand. These include capitulating to the condition, which sooner or later leads to the business failure, adopting coping strategies, which embodies the idea of accepting prevailing temporal condition but adapting to them, or adopting combating behaviors, a tactics and strategies to actively reduce disparities in demand and operating levels. Coping with or accepting temporal variation. Attraction operators can either sustain the operational status quo or concentrate the response effort or more accurately redeploying resources. This could involve first, devoting more efforts to visitor management in peak periods. Second is attempting to shift demand within existing peak periods. Third is tackling some of implication of seasonal employment as discussed above. Fourth is optimizing the use of the low season, quiet days, early mornings or late afternoons, or non-trading periods as appropriate. For maintenance and repair tasks, attending trade fairs, or other forms of business networking, training, business planning, and inventorying. Employ tactical responses to seasonal extension. These usually focus on marketing mix elements including product extension and development and pricing. Product extension and development is typical among these elements of historic houses are the staging of ad hoc events where space permits such as seasonal themed classic vehicle rallies, food and drinks demonstrations, craft fairs, antique fairs, and farmers market. Several of historic houses in the Scottish borders, For example, use the winter and early spring downtime for non-touristic revenue generating activities, such as promoting themselves as film locations, hosting seminars, and extended corporate hospitality events. Museums, galleries, and team commercial attractions can develop educational and community events to coincide with other quiet periods around the school curriculum or with other businesses, media, and charities. For example, hosting fundraising activities. Product extension initiatives in quiet period may focus on the non-core features of attractions, including retailing and food or beverage provision, where these are seen as viable revenue center in their own right. Second is pricing. Temporarily based pricing techniques remain an underutilized tools among attraction operators. This is particularly in the case of seasonal pricing and differentiation. Many attraction operators keep seasonal price differentiation narrow, concentrating instead of offering additional product benefit in non-peak periods. For example, entry to temporary exhibition, craft demonstration, or ancillary on-site attractions can be included in the gate price in shoulder or low season period or during quiet period during the week. Periodic pricing in the increasingly employed as a reward for early morning or late afternoon arrival during quieter period of the year to encourage greater spread in the visitor flows. However, where time differentiated pricing is used, the main objective is often to shift existing demand away from peak rather than to create additional off-peak demand. To survive the challenges arising in the recent year from UK government policy of free entry to prominent museum into the public ownership, commercial operators will have to employ ever more creative temporal pricing policies designed not simply to meet fixed cost contributions or other financial targets, but as importantly, to encourage repeat visitation and customer loyalty in the longer term. A strategic view of maximizing revenue opportunities, which might include market diversification, investment in facilities, interpretation and services, and adopting yield management philosophies. Market diversification is initially on the back of its core attraction. These have become self-sustaining and separate market in their own right. As an example, the Scott Whisky Experience, or SWE in Edinburgh, has successfully developed lucrative corporate hospitality, meetings, and small functions market. Next is the investment in facilities, interpretation, and services. To achieve the above market diversification, the SWE invested in converting office space into prestigious meeting rooms. Third is the adopting yield management philosophies, as creatively as in other sectors such as hotels, budget airlines, and car hire, though the cost structures of most attractions reflect high fixed to variable cost relationships, there is plenty of scope for attraction operators to be more responsive to temporal revenue contributions. Collective responses. On a broader front, it is increasingly recognized that attractions need to be proactive in destination area market development and adopt a more commercial outlook, where once a curatorial outlook pervaded, especially in public sector attractions. Numerous forms of collective responses channels are available to visitor attractions to mitigate the effects of temporal variation. Local Explorer Pass attractions initiatives have operated successfully in London, Edinburgh, North Wales, and Orkney. However, there is always the danger that participation in joint promotional initiative can be result in exacerbating an existing demand patterns if it succeeds in generating more business at the peak times. Accordingly, attraction operator needs to be mindful of their principal priorities between generalized or temporarily target demand generations. More formalized consortia enhance collective marketing, while trade associations such as Historic Houses Association and the Independent Museum Association are able to lobby government in policy areas that impinge on overall variability of their sectors. A more common route of participation for operators is active involvement in destinational seasonal extension marketing campaigns, and particularly in the case of multiple attractions operators involvement in national level season extension strategies. While the shoulder or low seasons may offer a natural space for collaboration compared with the peak seasons, commercial sensitivities can limit their effectiveness. For example, collective seasonal extension pricing promotions by locally competing attraction operators can be a double-edged sword. Noted the reluctance of attraction to engage in off-season joint ticketing initiatives when the risk of reduced dwell time and secondary expenditures by visitors has a greater impact than in peak season periods. Finally, the role of governments and their public sector agency must be considered as part of overall management response to temporal variation in tourism, which has been seen as a symptom of market failures in tourism. And as such form of the rationale for government intervention, the issue has been addressed in a wide range of public policy issues beyond direct tourism initiatives, including proposals to stagger academic holidays, notably by the European Commission's and Rural Development and Transportation Policy. In the table 12.3, it identifies a range of public sectors as well as attraction-specific responses to seasonality as surveyed by Golding and Natural Capital on behalf of Scottish Enterprise in Scotland.
Hi, I'm Geraldine. We will be talking about managing customer expectations in bad weather and low season periods, the experience of nature and wild-based attractions. So in Scotland, there are various of things that can be found and experienced by the visitors. This includes the natural environment they have, which have been recorded as the main reason why leisure visitors' holiday takes break in Scotland. Natural landscapes and managed wildlife resources are key attractions in the country's armory of tourism assets. Indeed, nature and wildlife-based attractions represents a growth sector among Scotland's diverse tourism attractions sector.
The principal nature-based attractions in Scotland is shown on the table below. It has the name and location of the attractions, the estimated visitors in the year 2005, and if it's a free or a paid entry. As you can see on the table below, 4 of those attractions, which are the Vane Farm RSBP Reserve in Kinross, the Loch Garten Osprey Centre in Lethbridge, the Cairngorm Reindeer Centre in Aviemore, and the Jed Forest Deer and Farm Park in Jedburgh, have an entrance fee, while the Scottish Seabird Centre in North Berwick, the Loch Winoch RSBP Nature Centre, the Scottish Wildlife Trust in Dunkeld, the Carl Laverock Wildlife and Wetland Trust in Dumfries, the Falls of Clyde Wildlife Reserve in New Lanark, St. Cyru's Nature Reserve Montrose, the Irish Marshes Nature Reserve RSPB in Kingussie, the Loch Groenort Nature Reserve in Argyll, and the Brightwater Visitor Center in the Isle of Skye have no entrance fee, which is a good thing because you don't have to prepare a large amount of money in order for you to visit those nature-based attractions in Scotland. So the Scotland Seabird Centre in North Berwick got the highest visitors in the year 2005, having an estimated number of 143,000 tourists visiting the place. It is followed by the Vane Farm RSPP Reserve in Kinross, with 76,000 estimated visitors coming to that place on the year 2005, and there's many more on the list.
The weather is typically cited as the source of disappointment in visitors' attitude surveys, although visitors' attitude remain positive towards Scotland's natural amenities. Expectations of good weather and the seasonal differences of Scotland at the different time of the year tend not to feature as major deterrents for the visitors. However, for those operators, the issues of seasonality and managing visitor expectation during peak and lean season are the major concerns. For the nature-based attractions, many of them have limited the degree to which enclosed visitors can substitute for the experience of closeness to natural attractions. Now we're moving on to capitalizing on the weather and time of the year. Around the world, nature reserve and wildlife spotting operators take advantage of what otherwise might be termed adverse or suboptimal conditions, promoting the advantages of wet weathers,
cloud cover, and reduced daylight hours can be used to effect in viewing wildlife. For example, spotting whales, dolphins, and basking sharks in the Irish Sea is often easier in wet weather than sunlight, while geese and other large bird species in flock formations can be seen to more striking effect during daybreak and when the sun is low. To chart the arrival, breeding cycle, behaviors, and departure of the different species for the entire year, they use the calendar approach as a tool to engage visitors, specifically the locals and those who have an interest in the natural resources, and to encourage repeat visitation. The Scottish Seabird Centre in North Berwick capitalizes to return to center to see the arrivals of migratory and breeding seabird species. They also provide live viewings that gives contextual educational activities to tourists. This can be done through remote cameras and webcams record live activity of seabird and interpretation boards and videos of the species cycles, habitats, and behaviors. The RSPB has promoted educational activities related to biodiversity studies and around its managed sites in different parts of Scotland. Bird watching is inherently seasonal and is promoted accordingly with late autumn and early winter migration. Watching promoted as seasonal highlights, the expectation management includes the details to the information on seasonal dress codes and equipment to heighten the experience. This supplements information on seasonal, journal, and nocturnal conditions and what can be seen within the protected habitats at different times. Therefore, the interpretation of the sites for visitors is based on the ethos of realistic.
The table shown below is the incentivizing visits to natural attractions during quiet or low season periods. The table illustrates the range of potential demand management approaches pertinent to temporal spreading in nature-based attractions. The emphasis here is on incentivization. So it has the temporal demand system. Those bulleted sentences you can see on the first column, those are the temporal demand system. You can also see some of the management issue and the visitor acceptability.
Now we're moving on to the visitor management approaches. In nature reserves and manages wilderness sites in a cool temperature areas where the core attraction is available throughout the year. For example, the deer parks, the protected marine areas, or the enclosed wetland reserves. There is often an ecologically driven pressure to spread the visitor's demand away from traditional peak patterns. Ultimately, the success of any visitor expectation management strategies will be through combined effectiveness of its communication, channels, and the message. For example, the ability to articulate the reasons for implementing temporal supply access or market differentiation and arguably greater for nature and wildlife-based attraction operators than for most other attraction types that can potentially harmful impacts of concentrated over-visitation. In conclusion, this chapter has demonstrated that for visitor attractions operators, temporal variation in demand and supply can be deconstructed into components of seasonality and short-term periodic variation. Temporal variation should be treated as a broad and complex phenomenon rather than seen purely in terms of fluctuations in visitor numbers or spend. As has been demonstrated, it encompasses a variety of perspectives beyond the immediacy of the marketplace. For attraction operators, these perspectives raise many issues in managing visitor demand, identifying and possibly influencing the wider causes of temporal imbalances, and acknowledging the wider destinational impacts of seasonality. However, coping or acceptance strategies may be more appropriate than the need to combat temporal variation. The case study of nature and wildlife-based operations illustrates the managing temporal market imbalances around an inherently perishable resource. Some casual factors such as climatic conditions and seasonal daylight hours are clearly beyond the control of tourism attractions and destination management or organization. However, attractions can capitalize on short delays or inclement weather. Moreover, they are not powerless to extend the temporal basis of the operations, even if a 12-month operating season or a 7-day operating week remain a realistic targets. Attractions in or close to urban areas may be best placed to take advantage of wider markets and the honeypot effect of visitor attractions clusters. Nevertheless, all attractions can benefit from considering the responses. Attraction types, given the potentially harmful impacts of concentrated overvisitation. However, the case study has illustrated that the options available for capitalizing on the seasons and climate are many and varied. Tactically or strategically, or indeed by accepting or adapting to temporal downtime in a proactive way in which the mission to promote realistic visitor expectation is paramount.